and good afternoon as applicable for our distinguished participants.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Welcome all of you for this resilience for the urban poor 2021, day 3 of this event. And we are now moving to the main session, number 3, which is climate and disaster resilience at the city level, just underlying the importance of dealing with both climate and disaster resilience for the urban settings. The session is being led by the Climate Change and Disaster Risk Management Department within division within ADB, the Urban Sector Group, as well as the Urban Climate Change Resilience Trust Fund, short UCCRTF. So this is the time to welcome all participants to this exciting and interesting session, given the panelists that we have today. I will be your moderator for this session, Virendra Sharma. I'm the Principal Urban Development Specialist representing the Urban Sector Group here. Just to bring some focus to the topic of the session, as you know that city level resilience towards both climate and disaster related risks requires a diversity of tools and approaches. And some of these tools and approaches are related to, risk sensitive land use management, could be around resilient infrastructure that provides access to the urban poor, early warning systems, disaster preparedness, and of course, financial preparedness to deal with the disasters, given the capacity of most of these cities. What is important now is the changing climate risk context, which we have seen around, the globe, the type of events, extreme events that are happening, also compounded by the pandemic risks, now require cities to revisit and improve upon the existing policies and tools for sustainable urban development. And that's something that we are focusing in this particular session. That could be, around relooking at issues around low-cost housing, the labor market, migration issues within cities, delivery of health services becomes very important because of the pandemic, and the whole idea of urban planning and open spaces, again, a really topical issue. And this means that the emerging risks that are being faced by the citizens, especially the poor and the vulnerable, need to be dealt with. How do we do it? How do cities and municipalities actually do this, given that they have limited capacity to respond to rapid urbanization-related challenges and the rural into urban migration? And the session will actually focus on city-level actions for building resilience and how these translate into increasing the resilience for the urban poor communities. Of course, resilience is a broader concept, but here we are more focused on the title of this event itself, which is, how do we build resilience of the urban poor and vulnerable communities? And what we are expecting from this session is challenges, the lessons that have been learned through some of the case studies that we presented by the panelists. And of course, we want to leave you with some takeaways, some recommendations, future opportunities that could be looked at, which impact on the decision-making processes and the results and outcomes for building resilience. So with that background, I just wanted to introduce the 4 distinguished panelists that we have today, representing different parts of Asia and their views on climate and disaster resilience. The first one, Mr. Nazrul Asram, is the project director of the Coastal Towns Environmental Infrastructure Project with the local engineering department in the government of Bangladesh. The second one will be Tony Lozoya, who is the president of the National Research Council Philippines, and will also showcase how private sector collaboration can work in Philippine cities to build resilience. The third panelist is Gopal Krishnan Bhatt. Unfortunately, due to certain reasons, he cannot join this, but we will be giving justice to his presentation. He is the team leader from the TARU Leading Edge, who's working on the Kolkata flood forecasting and early warning systems project in India, and we will certainly share that. Finally, I'll move to Lakshmi Sharma, who's the urban development specialist and working currently with ADB on scaling up city-level interventions for building resilience of the urban poor in Bangladesh. Before we actually start this session, I just wanted to introduce the issues around resilience at the city level, and would request a 2-minute video as a curtain raiser to some of the challenges, issues, and opportunities that we are facing here. So over to the organizers for the curtain raiser video.
Rapid urbanization, climate change, social inequality. These are the key challenges faced by Asian cities, which are home to more than half of the world's urban population. In 2013, the Urban Climate Change Resilience Trust Fund was established under the Asian Development Bank's Urban Financing Partnership Facility. With funding from the Rockefeller Foundation and the governments of Switzerland and the United Kingdom, it aims to build resilience through interventions at various scales, across sectors, and in the case of climate change issues related to air quality and flood risk management, for example, it also goes beyond borders. Through investments in resilience building infrastructure, tools, and mechanisms, the Trust Fund aims to reduce the risks of at least 2 million people to the adverse impacts of climate change. Now in its 8th year, UCCRTF has worked with over 70 cities across 8 priority countries and continues to support ADB's operational priority to make cities more livable.
Thank you very much for the video. I think what I emphasized in the early introduction as a part of this session, I think has been amply demonstrated by some of the things that you saw in this video, working across scales, the integrated approach to resilience. So this provides a good curtain raiser to our session today. And before we actually go to our distinguished panelists, I just wanted to elicit more response from the audience. And here we would invite you to a poll to 2 questions to understand the expectations and the interest in this particular topic. The first question will be to reduce the vulnerabilities of the urban poor and ensure their recovery from climate change shocks and stresses. What would you consider as the top 3 most critical city-level interventions? And these are multiple choices that are available to you to answer some of those issues that were listed in this first question. So now we can see the results coming in. There seems to be a good balance between, the top 2 or 3 So it seems that the iterative dialogue and engagement with stakeholders and vulnerable populations is something that is really leading currently, followed very closely by investing in knowledge and capacities of city staff and citizens on climate change response, followed by supporting evidence-based and multi-criteria decision-making on infrastructure investments, prioritization, and of course the others. So very interesting results, but I think the audience is giving a lot of importance to this iterative dialogue and engagement with stakeholder, which also reinforces the whole theme of this particular session and even the event, which is building the resilience of the urban poor. And of course, that cannot be done without working directly with the communities who are facing the challenges of this. So time to go for our second poll question. This is going to be what should be the city's top priority in order to implement and sustain climate and disaster resilience interventions. And again, we have a set of multiple choices for you to vote on. So let's see, what emerges as key points from this particular poll question. So over to you. Again, we have multiple choices, which is around, the iterative dialogue and engagement, syncing urban plans and programs, securing sources of climate and development finance, evidence-based and multi-criteria decision-making, investing in knowledge and capacities, improve linkages with national governments and other local governments and civil society organizations, and of course, any others. So slightly different set of responses coming in, which is obvious because the first one was very much around reducing the vulnerabilities and the top choices for that. Whereas here, from a city perspective, the city planners, decision makers, what do we see as the top priority to implement and sustain these interventions? And I think it seems the whole issue of fiscal capacity, the financial capacity of the cities, securing sources for climate and development finance is something that is there, quite important. But I still see the investment in knowledge and capacities of the city staff and citizens on climate change response as emerging quite ahead. The dialogue, iterative dialogue is still important, but perhaps people are looking more at the response side of it, and that's why this is more. We also see improving linkages, again, cross-sectoral, moving beyond our silos and working across scales and boundaries, as was mentioned in the earlier video, is also important. So I think it's very clear that the idea of investing in knowledge and capacities of the staff and citizens is certainly important, but equally important is the securing the sources for climate and development finance. Which again, brings us back to this whole issue. What do we do about these compounding risks, the shocks and stresses that the cities are facing and its populations are facing? What are the solutions for that? And whether it's just around, I find that there is very little on urban planning and programs. Perhaps, there's more about securing sources of finance there. Then, of course, evidence-based and knowledge and capacities and improving linkages is certainly emerging as important issues. So, of course, this gives a good backdrop to our session. And this is the time that, we would want to move forward and see how our panelists are going to, tell us the challenges and solutions to deal with building climate and disaster resilience at the city level. What I would request the panelists, of course, please restrict your presentations and your interventions to the allotted time of only 10 minutes. There'll be a signal by the organizers. Please dwell more on what are the good practices that can be shared. And of course, good practices are fine, but are these practices scalable? Are we able to replicate them? That's the other thing. Any challenges that you see in your particular area of work would be really important. Lessons learned and recommendations. What are we leaving behind in this session for the audience is important. And that's where I think I would request the panelists to concentrate. So this is the time to introduce each of the panelists. Of course, the first one will be SM Nazrul Islam. I've already introduced. He's been working with the local government engineering department in Bangladesh for about 30 years and currently working on this coastal towns environmental integrated project. So over to you, Nazrul, for your brief presentation and of course takeaways from that presentation. So thank you. Over to you, Nazrul.
Yes, thank you. Did you hear me? Thank you very much. Good morning and good afternoon. As applicable to our distinguished participants. Actually, this is SM Nazrul Islam, working for about 30 years at different level of LGD. You know the famous organizations of Bangladesh dealing with the improvement of livelihood and living conditions, and also the communications for the people and the community, especially poor and women, through intervention of infrastructure with institutional capacity and community development in urban, rural, and small-scale water sector in Bangladesh. Actually, I would like to share my project activities and experience in light of the topics that is importance of risk-informed infrastructure planning, interventions for building urban poor resilience. In this slide, just an overview of my project, Coastal Town Environmental Infrastructure Project. It is ADB funded and collaboration with government of Bangladesh. There are two outputs in my project. This is improvement climate resilient municipal infrastructure. Another one is the strengthen institutional capacity, governance, and awareness. The outcome of the project, the increased climate and disaster resiliency in coastal towns. And impact is improved well-being in the selected coastal towns. The selected means we're working on 10 municipalities called Paurasabha in Bangladesh out of 300, total 328 Paurasabha or municipality. This is achievement in our project objectives. The fourth picture is here. Urban poor in infrastructure works. Second one is ward committee meeting. Third one is training on income generating activities. And fourth one is disaster community meeting. These four pictures actually shows three most important things and reflect also. One is the ensured livelihood opportunities. Second is gender sensitivity. And third is empowerment, means the people's participation and the decision-making process. These three important things that our project activities are doing. We have two types of intervention. One is structural intervention, another is non-structural interventions. Structural interventions, the restoration of natural water bodies and canals, that is completely nature-based solution, and the improvement of drainage network. By this type of intervention, 20% reduction in inundation cases, protected asset, this is the result, protected asset of urban poor and safeguarding livelihood. Second intervention is improved water supply system, 70% increase to consumer, complying with government water quality standard. Here they reduce the waterborne diseases. Second is enhance storage provisions during storm event. Third one is the improved sanitation facilities. The additional 16,000 households access to climate-proof public and community toilet facilities. This is the result is the ensured health and hygiene. Fourth one is multi-purpose cyclone shelter with solar standby and rainwater harvesting. This is the nature-based solution. Protection of life and asset. This is the result, and impact is additional 8,600 households with access to cyclone shelter during disaster. The integrated landfill facilities. 2 solid waste management and septic management sub-project under implementation. It protects the water courses. It is also the nature-based solution. Emergency climate resilient access road with tree plantation. Tree plantation is also, and also the slope protections by vetiver grass. So this is another nature-based solution. Positive livelihood and economic return is there. Commercial building, we have 18 economic infrastructure like multi-purpose market, bus terminal, boat landing stations, which actually create opportunity, job opportunity, as well enhance the revenue of the Paurasabha or the municipalities. And non-structural intervention, non-interventional intervention activity is the community-driven and gender mainstreaming, that is the communities active participated in the selection and design of community facilities, where the 53% is women. Community level empowerment, formation of community representation and participation, including women in hazard mapping, vulnerability assessment, updating master plan. And third one is updated urban master plan. Incorporates climate vulnerability assessment and designation of no development zones along with water bodies. This is nature-based solution. Climate resilient building standard guideline. Unified climate resilient design prepared for the participating town. And the gender representation, active participation and decision making of women in meeting of disaster management committee. Improved communications, knowledge-based awareness program reached more than 8,000 people, where 51% is women. And the livelihood training program imparted to 2,507 beneficiaries, out of which 98% women in different occupations like computer skill, livestock farming, beauty parlor, and other occupations. The good practice of this project is comprehensive and integrated approach in building community resilience to disaster, assured community participation in planning and decision making, meaningful and sustainable occupational and livelihood training for the urban poor, promotion of gender mainstreaming in all aspects of the project, institutionalization of public participation in governance, sustainability of all operational and maintenance requirement. The challenges encountered and the solution that we have shown here, this is the slow process. The challenge is slow process involved in instilling behavior changes. The overcome method is continuous and selective awareness campaigning. The practicality of continued community participation and established empowerment, this is another challenge. The solution is institutionalization of key consultative committee. Third, the limited access to land and financing inhibits entrepreneurship. The solution is conducted benefit monitoring survey or the case study. Fourth one is lack of available land of major infrastructure work. Your land-related issue to be addressed well ahead of the time at the beginning of the project. Next one is occurrence of climate disaster during construction work. The solution is provision of realistic time frame to be considered for the completion of the contract. And next one is pandemic outbreaks of COVID-19 caused significant delay in implementation. The solution awareness and strict enforcement of COVID-19 related health and safety rules to be strictly followed during implementation. Fourth one is the lack of management capacity of the municipal or Purashobha personnel. The frequent training, workshop and exposure visit is very much essential. The lesson learned and recommendation is integrated technological and suitable sustainable community-based approach are important for inclusive development. Continuous monitoring and evaluation of the integration of the urban poor, including women empowerment during project implementation. Next one is sustained awareness and capacity building for community and institution are needed. Next one, the explore opportunity to enhance beneficiaries' access to capital. Next, institutionalize stakeholder participation, including the urban poor in governance system. Nature and final one is nature-based solution should be emphasized in upcoming CTEIIP, that is proposed second coastal town environmental infrastructure improvement project. This is all about my presentation. This short presentation given under CTIP achievement for established climate change resilience within the Purashobha, inclusive of the related nature-based solution, sustainable through improved governance and continued capacity building, training and awareness. Actually, this is very much aligned with our objectives of today's event, like resilience for the urban poor. Thank you. Thank you. I have almost finished. I have finished my presentation.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much. Nazrul, I think that was an excellent presentation. I liked the way you showed the structural and the non-structural interventions And the approach that we were talking about, this resilience approach, that is something that you illustrated very well in the presentation. And it gives us an idea that, to achieve climate and disaster resilience, that's the multi-sectoral integrated approach that we need to use. I would also request the audience here to look at the chat box and the question and answer. Please ensure that whatever questions that you have, your inferences and any ideas that you have, please convey them through the question answer box that is available in your platform. So we move to the next panelist now. And after giving you a good idea of how resilience building happens in a government context in terms of a project led by the engineering department that Nazrul presented, I think it's also important to bring in the private sector collaboration with the Philippine cities on resilience strategy, formulation, and delivery. And here I would request Antonia Yulo Loizaya, or Tony, who is the president of the National Research Council, who's working on various platforms, international platforms on disaster risk reduction and sustainable development, to make her presentation. Over to you, Tony. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Verinder. Just a brief background about the National Resilience Council. We are a public-private partnership that is science and technology based. As you can see, there are a number of partners from different sectors: local government, national government, academia, private sector, and the CSO community. We work together in a rather learning by doing experience in terms of building resilience in local governments. This is the first batch of our partners in terms of local governments. There are 8 cities and 1 province. And we are now about to start with 10 more provinces and 2 special regions. Apologies. So just as a very quick background, and you've heard a lot about already the urban poor in the Philippines. Registered poor, those individuals that are income poor and therefore registering in the statistical basis that the national government recognizes, only about 9.3% of 51% of the country, which is urban. This number is misleading, and you've heard from other presenters on the Philippines regarding the invisible poor and those that actually manifest differently, whether it's through informality, the lack of social access to social services and protection. And I show here, in fact, in the case of Metro Manila, a morphology of urban poverty that is physically extractable from satellite imagery. We have been tracking this kind of poverty throughout the year since 1997. And so there is a lot of data on the spread of informality and poverty in this regard that is ground truthed. There is also the fact that there is a shifting role of the private sector in the country. And it used to be that the private sector was just dealing with response and relief. But now we find that various private sector corporations are involved in every stage of disaster risk reduction. And what we've tried to do at the National Resilience Council is direct that participation somewhat, not just to emergency management and response, but to longer-term investments, both structural and non-structural, in the resilience of communities in each of the cities that we work in. So the shifting role is in fact part of that background as well. And you'll see the different ways by which the private sector is now currently involved in the different urban and rural settings in which they work. What are the challenges in terms of bringing the private sector to work on the resilience of cities and really come together in terms of strategies that will affect the resilience of the urban poor. The first challenge is really access to science for decision making. And this is not just spatial scale related, this is temporal scale. How fast can the science actually be released and therefore consumed and applied to decision making? But also the spatial scale at which the science is available. We need the kind of granularity that is necessary to make decisions at the local level. And here I cite particularly just climate scenarios, but obviously this applies to a lot of the science that is available in terms of the larger scale disasters and hazards that we know. The second challenge that we have in terms of bringing together the private sector in terms of working on resilience strategies for cities is trying to have people focus on how climate action and disaster risk reduction should be taken together. So we should not separate the two. There should be maintained in terms of adaptation and mitigation, the focus on vulnerability to bring down risk. At the same time, in terms of disaster risk reduction, to keep the all hazards framework, because at the end of the day, we need to be open to the fact that hazards can compound, they can cascade, and that in fact changes the risk framework within which we all must work. So there are those connections that are challenging, but there are also these issues of top down and bottom up. So how do we bring together national and local in terms of policy and practice coherence? So these are among the more critical challenges that we have faced in terms of trying to build a consensus towards working together for resilience. The third major challenge that we have seen is, in fact, in every city that we work, and this is just work that is present, I'm presenting here on 3 cities, the poverty and the social vulnerability footprint is different. We need to unpack vulnerability in each of the cities to address the specific dimensions that are in fact should be prioritized in terms of trying to bring about the transformation towards vulnerability. And for that to be done, we need the social science to be present. The social scientists need to be part of this situation in terms of defining the differentiated exposure and vulnerability of the urban poor in the different cities within which we work. So there is no one size fits all. The private sector needs to understand that, as do the local government decision makers. What have we learned? A theory of change is necessary, and necessarily that must be multi-stakeholder. It must involve multiple disciplines, and in fact must involve transdisciplinary approaches. We need to learn from communities themselves. We need to understand traditional knowledge, and that must feed back into the process. So these processes and procedures that actually, and protocols that actually result in specific outcomes are what we need to build consensus over. There are multiple pathways. There are multiple activities that are part of our work at the National Resilience Council, and you see them there. And we need to agree on impacts. Pathways, procedures, protocols may vary, but the outcomes and impacts there need to be agreement on. And that's where this issue of negotiated resilience for cities needs to come in. And how that's reflected in governance is in fact the most critical. The nexus approach needs to be adopted. And that means all the outcomes need to be taken into consideration when we make decisions at the leadership level and at the community level. Leadership and governance are critical. And what we have learned, in fact, is that unless the local chief executive buys in to owning the risk and therefore co-creating the solutions, this will not happen. Resilience will not happen. So leadership and governance and science and technology to produce the evidence that in fact can inform decision-making need to take place. We need to support that. So in the National Resilience Council, that process is supported. It takes 3 years, but of course, this is a never-ending process in terms of learning and doing and adapting in terms of risk governance. So here we have a process. Thank you. And finally, the adoption of tools, climate and disaster risk assessments, systems thinking to think about how we can apply the evidence across the different units of government, and multi-hazard thinking and adapting to change. In fact, you see there number 2, this was originally a multi-hazard map, but now it is overlaid with infrastructure that relates to health facilities in support of COVID-19. Recommendations. The private sector needs to get directly involved in evidence-informed decision-making. And this can be done through the ESG standards that are now part of resilience, the sustainability reporting. And this is where academia can make a very big difference in terms of the role of the private sector. We need to begin pushing for the integration of climate and disaster resilience into sustainability reporting, not just focus on mitigation, climate mitigation or emissions reduction, energy efficiency and solid waste management. Risk management related to climate and disasters needs to be made part of sustainability reporting. And finally, this issue of how does the private sector begin to engage with community resilience and not just asset resilience? There are opportunities to work with academia on the intersections between human and natural capital, and that must be reflected somehow in the balance sheets of corporations. And that's an advocacy of the National Resilience Council. Lastly, in terms of opportunities, some low-hanging fruit, we've already heard about nature-based solutions, and that is a big push in terms of the sustainability agenda of corporations. We need a quick risk estimation tool for climate and multiple hazards, and innovations in social entrepreneurship for resilience at the nano and micro level. I show here the QRE tool for COVID-19 for small, micro, and medium-sized enterprises. We need such a tool to include nano livelihoods and to include multiple hazards. And finally, sometimes there is no need to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. There are institutions that are already present, microfinance institutions that can be supported by the private sector to directly impact already what the priorities are for urban poor resilience. And therefore, we need to continue supporting these as well as innovating in terms of developing subnational, local risk financing and risk transfer instruments that relate specifically to those different footprints of poverty in our cities. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's been an excellent presentation, Tony, and you have very well, illustrated the challenges that the private sector face, but also you have provided us insights on how this can be done. And what is important in your presentation is the way, risk management, which is, risk assessment and management, which is inherent in most of the private sector operations, can start including climate and disaster risk. And that means integrating this risk with the overall risk management and assessment protocols that the private sector has to ensure that they are not only building the private sector resilience, which could be around their supply chains, which could be around their products and assets, but it's beyond that of the communities also. And I think you also illustrated how that gap between resilience of the communities and bringing the private sector in needs more work on tools and approaches. So again, my request to the audience for the reflections on what the panelists are presenting. You've already had two very good presentations, and I would request to put in your questions there. This is the time to invite our next panelist. As I said that, there was supposed to be another presentation by Gopalakrishnan Bhatt on flood early warning systems in Kolkata under currently a UCCRTF project, and somehow he's not been able to join. So I would now request Lakshmi Sharma to come in. Lakshmi, as I mentioned, is currently with the ADB South Asia Urban Development and Water Division, an engineer with 20 years of experience in various areas, and of course in various DMCs. So over to Lakshmi. I think the presentation that Lakshmi will make will connect very well with the first presentation that Nazrul made, where he started off with the first coastal towns environment improvement infrastructure improvement project, And Lakshmi will tell us, what are the lessons that we are taking from that project into the design of the second Coastal Towns Environmental Infrastructure Improvement Project. So over to you, Lakshmi, for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Virendra. So you have already given the background that I'm connecting with the first presentation. I think there's lots of learning from the second presentation also, which we are doing more or less the similar way. So let me start my presentation. Next slide, please. So since we're talking about the cities of Bangladesh are equally, like the Philippines itself, equally most vulnerable in the world with high exposure to multitude of climate-related hazards. And cities' performance are very much related with the country economic growth, and the climate risks poses key challenges. 41, that is the country goals. And the climate risks cause an average loss of about 1.3% in the growth of the GDP per year. We need to understand the context in the country level as well as while we're dealing with the city level also. So Bangladesh has really Delta Plan 2100 states that they ensure safety from floods and the climate change related disasters. And according to, as usual, urban development need to consider the climate risks as a part of the urban development ecosystem and should be considered to use climate and disaster risk information as a starting point to drive the urban development related decision making, shaping the investment. This is very much clearly coming out from the previous presentations and the experience of the first coastal town project also. Next slide, please. One of the learning among many is must to inform the project design. Now climate risk analysis is possible to greater depth to some extent compared to the 10 years back while we were designing the first coastal town environment improvement projects. Now there is advancement of a data science, technology instruments, and the tools such as SPADE. In this context, let me explain how we are approaching using technology and the data science, the next project, which intends to support 22 coastal Purushabha. First, by analyzing current and future climate analysis, distilling the challenges and looking them from climate and disaster risk lens, which are very much interlinked, as we have seen and as we have shared by the previous panelists, interlinked with the municipal governance, including the stakeholders. So in this map, according to the UNICEF, 20 of 64 districts are exposed to the high risks from climate change related disasters. Coastal Purushabha, which are facing to the Bay of Bengal, are very vulnerable to climate hazards such as cyclones and intense rainfall, as well as the sea level rise. So town exposures to climate change are shaped by rapid unplanned development, low adaptive capacity, high poverty analysis. And we also did the analysis of the all proposed 22 Purushabhas in terms of a different multiple factors. And analysis clearly shows every town are at risk, however level of a town vulnerability differs relatively. Next slides, please. So bioanalysis is coming recently, which we have done it. The temperature projected to increase in the intensity of extreme rainfall and increase the intensity and extent of a coastal flooding. And also there is a hinder in the freshwater availability. As seen in the previous slide, most of the municipalities are experiencing negative population growth over the recent decades due to the climate hazards and the loss of livelihoods. Coastal areas are characterized by the high poverty incidence, 15 to 45%. Urban poor vulnerability increases to the impacts of climate variability and change are resulting in disruption of their livelihoods and the loss of incomes. So we also did a study to understand the nature of the losses, which are very much of a has a multifaceted, the physical, financial, and human, and social, natural. So we have seen in the first these questions from the answers, these participants pool, these are multiple factors, and multiplicity in the losses are also there. So it has to deal from the multiple lenses also. The second learning is the understanding and constitutionalizing the losses and how citizens, particularly vulnerable population and women, will mention and variability and the natural disaster. Next slides, please. So undertaking citywide climate and disaster risk assessment to inform the development plans. So and then the challenges. The challenges is compounded with the several other factors also. So most of the cities has an inadequate basic municipal infrastructure for resilience, and the capacity to strengthen the resilience. The most important one related to this forum is a limited adaptive capacity of low income and vulnerable populations. They have limited access to resilient livelihoods and to resilient infrastructures. So saving their lives are very important, like the early warning systems are not there, and the cyclone shelters, which are being the intervention in the first coastal. So, hello. Yeah. Okay. To inform the project design, the next phase, including the country understanding the current regs, and also the review of the first this project design from the climate risks angle and identifying the opportunities for the NBS. The most important lessons are the different groups of a population, such as vulnerable population and women, will experience differential vulnerability due to their high sensitivity and limited development in the context of changing climates needs to be considered, and with an the urban poor. So finally, a holistic approach to the adaptation is urgently needed. Next slides, please. So based on those learnings and the studies, the team is taking the strategy that the team is taking to build the resilience and the societal preparedness towards climate change. So with that, we were focusing on the three outputs. Second outputs are being more focused on the next phase of the project. That is the livelihood resilience improvement, which will be focusing to reducing the informality and encouraging the vulnerable population, including women entrepreneurship, skills training, matching with the industry demands, and establishes linkages. So all these three outputs will support to strengthen the resilience of towns, human and natural systems. No, we don't have now. Next slide, please. So, hello. Thank you so much. So I hope it's clear.
Okay. Thank you very much, Lakshmi. I think we had some interruptions, but I hope the audience got the key messages that were coming from your presentation. And as I said earlier, the experiences that were built in from the coastal towns first project are now being taken over into the second project. And I think what Lakshmi also mentioned very clearly is the multiplicity. So if you have to deal with building climate and disaster resilience, especially for the urban poor, then it's important to look at the diversity of factors that are responsible for that. And of course, your approaches, whether it's financial, whether it's the governance, whether it's infrastructure or working with the communities, all have to come together in a more coordinated and integrated approach. And that's, of course, it's easy said and done, but the challenge is how we do it. At this stage, I think there's been a good response, number of questions coming in, and it'll be good for, at this stage, we can request the audience to please introduce themselves, name, their affiliation and location. I see 3 likes for one of the questions, which is, the first one is to Tony, and I will request that that particular question, which is one of the lessons learned, is on the nexus approach, risk governance and resilience. What does it mean in practice? So over to the audience for this particular question. Okay.
Sorry, would you like me to answer that question, Virender?
Yes, I think I was intending for the audience to actually mention that, but because I think the time constraint, it'll be best if you can go ahead and provide your answer.
Thank you. So basically, the Nexus approach is really a process by which we build leadership and governance through shared evidence that actually will inform all the different decisions that are going to take place. So when we assume the framework that has all those pillars that you see, human development, local economy, environment, human security, infrastructure, what we stress to the local government and their internal as well as external stakeholders is that any decision they make along any of those pillars actually has an implication, has an impact on the other pillars. So the whole concept of systems thinking and really systems thinking needs to be embraced by the local government. The chief executive in particular needs to be able to look at decisions that need to be made horizontally across those pillars, but also vertically, what it means in terms of the different authorities and mandates that are present when in fact they need to implement a decision. So the Nexus approach really brings together all the different disciplines and the different units in terms of the local government in awareness as well as in implementation of specific decisions that are evidence informed towards resilience goals. Practically speaking, we had to organize local disaster resilience councils. We're now in the process of merging this membership with the local disaster risk reduction and management councils so that they become more inclusive and are more diverse in terms of their membership, so that decision making can in fact be participative in terms of the other stakeholders in each of the cities. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I think I see a number of other questions which are also related to, Tony on the private sector presentation, but in terms of, just giving focus to some of the other questions, I wanted to bring Lakshmi into it. There are 2 questions, which is, one is on the climate and disaster resilience at the densely populated city, and perhaps linked to this is what specific information is impacted to the special planning framework can we do through spatial planning to address the challenges in the city, and especially if we are dealing with densely populated cities, most in the context that you have in Bangladesh. So over to you, Lakshmi.
So thank you, Birendra. It's very important in context with the Bangladesh these questions. So first, most important thing is whatever the infrastructure or the intervention that is the cities to be done, the locational analysis is very much important. Like for example, in case of a second coastal towns, how far the cycle shelters to be constructed, where to be located, whether those are in a disaster-prone area or not. So that will be giving the safe haven, because there's a lots of incidences happening, casualties when there is a disasters and they were unable to access the cyclone shelters. So that's the very important one. The locational analysis and understanding the climate risks on that perspectives. So settlement vis-a-vis the risk analysis. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lakshmi. This brings us to the close of the session. I think we are already up as far as our time is concerned, and this is the time to synthesize the key messages that are coming from this. Of course, I would say the first one is more about ensuring that we are addressing the issues of climate and disaster resilience from a much more perspective, which requires a combination of tools and interventions. And as I mentioned in the beginning, this is really important. The second one is systemic climate resilience for the urban poor. How do we combine the hard and soft, the structural and the non-structural measures that was illustrated by Nazarul also in his presentation. And the third one is the shifting role of the private sector, and how do we bring in more interventions both in the urban setting which incorporate climate and disaster risk and allow us to build the resilience for the urban poor. So this brings me to the end of the session. I would like to thank the panelists, including the three presentations that were made, also Mr. Bhatt, who couldn't join us, and especially the organizers. Behind the scenes, there's been a lot of work around these platforms. So the organizers of the Resilience for Urban Poor Forum, the Urban Sector Group, and the UCCRTF team who have been working on this, and of course, Argo through the CCDRM, the Climate Change and Disaster Risk Management, and UP, who have been working in designing this whole forum and ensuring that we have interesting and stimulating presentations and takeaways for the audience where they could go back, think over, and perhaps implement in their own settings. So thank you very much. And back to the organizers now. Thank you.